All right, Internet, welcome back to my kitchen, as usual. So this week is part 3 of the CIS control series that I decided to do. And it's 5 parts altogether, doing four controls for each week, basically. And this is part 3, so we're going to jump right into it. First off, the agenda, obviously, so we're going to talk about the controls, and we'll talk about next week's controls. But first I'm going to talk about this really quick to provide some context. So if you need more context than what I'm about to give you, you should go to part 1 to get more about the history of the CIS controls, where they came from, why they exist, why they're relevant, etc. But in a nutshell, basically these are 20 controls that have been derived by an institution called CIS, this acronym. And CIS basically crowdsourced a bunch of really brilliant people in InfoSec, pulled them together from different industries and different geographies, and they basically created and curated this 20 list of controls ranked in priority that everyone should go through if they want to build out a secure, InfoSec department and network. With that said, these are the 20 controls, and we're going to jump into part 3, so that's going to be 9 through 12. Now I'll fade everything else out. So those are the 4 we'll talk about. With that said, let's get into it. So first control. So this control, let me go back really here. So limits, okay. So this first control is all about kind of limiting the available public ports, services, and protocols from your network to the internet. And exposing the network to the internet is basically a gift and a curse, because we need to use it obviously to do everything, but it's also a curse because everyone gets access to our network when we're trying to secure it. And what I've populated here are 2 kind of prominent things that a lot of people know about in the InfoSec space. So we'll talk about Equifax first. So actually everybody pretty much knows about the Equifax breach. So the Equifax breach is really popular. There was like 170 million something records that were leaked during that hack. And the point that I want to make here is basically scanning. So attackers are always scanning all the time. So they're either passively or actively scanning basically the entire internet, looking for both publicly available ports, services, and protocols, or vulnerable port services and protocols. Equifax, this is what happened to them basically. So there was a group of attackers that scanned their network, and they basically tried to map out the entire network, the attackers, to understand the lay of the land. And then what they started doing is they started scanning, specifically doing narrow scans on different services that were both available and vulnerable. And they got access to those, and that's when the leak happened. And that's like one big piece of the scanning kind of example. And then another piece here is Shodan. So Shodan is basically, you can think of it as a search repository. It's kind of like Google for devices that have been available on the internet when they maybe shouldn't have. And Shodan, what it's doing is it's always scanning all the time for a variety of devices, and it's always looking for different devices. So if you go to Shodan and you look up different types of devices, you can see webcams that are available. You can look into, there's industrial control systems that are available. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that's actually accessible when it shouldn't be. And part of the reason is people actually deploy these devices without actually securing them in a way that they're not being vulnerable to default passwords and usernames and a variety of other things. So control 9, so limits. Know your limits, basically. And in this part, they talk about limiting and controlling both your ports, services, and protocols, like I've said. And here are the sub-controls that they mention. I'm going to talk about 2 because talking about all of them takes too much. So the first is mapping ports, protocols, and services. So do what the attackers are doing to you all the time anyways. And that's what these 2 sub-controls I'm going to talk about are. Because if the attackers are always doing broad scans, so they're broadly scanning your network, figuring out what's available and what's open, that's something you should be doing as well. And you should kind of get an understanding of all the different devices on your network. And this is kind of going an extra step for you. But basically, understand all the devices in your network, scan it, understand what protocols, ports, and services are available on those devices, and map those to each of your devices in your asset inventory. So by having that, you know exactly what should be available, what shouldn't be available, and you can kind of keep better tabs on that. The next thing is automating your port scans. So you should basically have a reoccurring of scanning your ports and doing automated scans so it's easier on you. And that's the automated port scans piece. So on to Control 10. Control 10, so if you know the symbol, you know that it's wreaking havoc on humanity basically right now. And what this is the Maze ransomware. So Maze ransomware has caused havoc on a variety of different industries. So the healthcare industry has been hit pretty bad. I think it was Cognizant, Xerox, and Kodak, maybe, or Canon. So I think it was Canon, that have all been ransomwared by this ransomware, basically. And so what ransomware is in a nutshell is the attacker attacks your stuff, they get into your access, they access your data, they encrypt all of your data, and they say, give me a bunch of cryptocurrency and I'll give your data back. And if you don't, then I'll publish it into the public and everybody can see all your data has been leaked. The premise is ransomware. And these Maze ransomware folks are causing some serious damage. And that leads to this control, which is basically data recovery. So data recovery in the sense of having data backups, having images for your systems, and also having redundancy in your infrastructure. So the subcontrols here are listed here, and I'm only going to talk about 3 because that's better than 2, I guess. So the first is auto backups. So anybody that has data that's critical and important for them to maintain, they should automatically be backing that up. Let it be in incremental chunks, in differential chunks, or in full backups. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's being automated and you're not having to do it yourself manually. But that leads to the next one, which is testing backups. Because a lot of people actually, they have automated backups, but they set it and forget it and never test to see if it actually works. So they have a half-baked plan that's not being fully executed. So after you've done your automated backups, you should, on a recurring basis, test these backups on different systems and different scenarios at different times, and see if the backup actually fully restores the systems that you're expecting it to. Because most people don't, and that actually comes around to bite them. The next thing is offline backups. And this is another thing that has been pointed out as a big mistake by a lot of InfoSec organizations recently because of these ransomware attacks. So offline backups in the sense that if I back up all my infrastructure on my network and then I do maybe an auto sync to the cloud, I have 2 backups, so I think I'm secure. But in the end, when ransomware happens, depending on the attacker, if they're sophisticated, they can actually encrypt your network and also encrypt your cloud duplicated backup. So instead of doing your backup online, your duplicated backup, you should have an offline backup that's disassociated from your network, both logically and physically, and cannot be accessed by anything else. So offline backups, pretty important, especially in a world of ransomware. So the next one is 11, and this one is about secure configurations for network devices. And basically what I wanted to do here, so on the left-hand side, you can see the convenience you demanded is now mandatory. I thought that was pretty good. And the premises of that little GIF right there is basically whenever we create a solution as a company, we're always favoring convenience over security most of the time. And the reason being is if you have friction on your products and your solutions, customers aren't going to use it because it's not easy to use. So convenience does have a trade-off though, because the more convenient something is, it tends to be less secure. And another thing I wanted to show here is IoT devices. So IoT devices are going to be a cajillion in 2030, and there's going to be all over the place. And these statistics are probably wrong because most statistics are, but they're at least directionally accurate. So there's going to be a lot of IoT devices, and that can be a big issue. And the reason being is securing these IoT devices as well as security appliances and network devices, etc. So that's what this control is all about. And there's quite a few sub-controls here. And obviously I'm not going to talk about all of them as usual, so I'll talk about 2. So the first is standard secure config. So this is something we've talked about previously, I think in part 1, where basically having a standard baseline for a configuration of a device is pretty important. And the good thing about having a secure baseline and imaging that baseline is that if you have this device and you have maybe 10,000 of the same device, you just have to put up a lot of upfront work. So configuring and testing this device in a secure way, imaging that, and then duplicating it across the other 10,000. So having standards of your secure baseline device is a pretty important sub-control. The next one is dedicated network for your device management. So this one was interesting. So when reading about this and researching it, one of the best practices when it comes to this is actually having a separated, usually logically separate network to manage your devices when you're configuring them, putting out updates, etc. So, and the reason you want to do this is most device management is at a centralized location. So if an attacker gets access to this centralized system, then they have basically access to reducing the security of your entire network through this device configuration system. So it's important to actually have that logically separated, so if an attacker does attack your network, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get access to central control of all your devices, from preventing them to move around. So that's another interesting one. And the last one, control 12, is Ninja Turtles. What is this? Ninja Turtles and Castle Walls. Got it, Castle Walls, okay. So this one's all about boundary defense. And the reason I put Ninja Turtles here is because kind of the old school mentality around security and information security is basically creating massive castle walls and ensuring that nothing can get in. So you have a hard shell and a soft inside, similar to a turtle. And by having these boundaries really protected, it works to protect from people getting in. But once they're in, they can basically go wherever they want. And that's this other photo I have here, this diagram, where this has actually become a concern in cloud security. Because if you get access to someone's cloud infrastructure and they only have good boundary defenses but no good internal defenses, then they get access to basically east to west movement. So in InfoSec, they talk about north and south. So north and south is the ingress and egress of your infrastructure. So it's the in and out entry point of your infrastructure. And then the east and west movement is basically laterally moving around the infrastructure. So if you don't have good basically controls inside as well as outside, then the person that gets in can go anywhere they want. So that's where this comes. So this one is about boundary defense, but I just wanted to show that it's more important to, not more important, but equally important to focus on the insides and the outsides. So we're going to talk about outsides now. And what they had a lot of subcontrols here, and we're not going to talk about all of them because there's way too many. So the first one is actually blocking known bad IPs. And this is basically beneficial to a lot of security people because InfoSec individuals share IPs that have been known as malicious. So you can actually keep an updated inventory list of bad IPs and automatically block those IPs from both getting into and people reaching those IPs from your network. And that list should always be being updated because IPs tend to go in and out of bad behavior because the IPs that we're labeling as bad might not necessarily be inherently bad. They might just be a victim's IP that's been a stepping stone for an attacker to use to get access to someone else. So that IP may become not bad in the future. And the next one is decrypting traffic. So on the internet today, most of stuff is encrypted because that's just good to do. And with that happening, that means that you don't really know who's talking to who and what data is being exchanged. Or you at least you know who's talking to who, but you don't necessarily know what's being said. And this is a good practice, but sometimes quite difficult because depending on the encryption, it takes a lot of processing power to decrypt a packet. And basically the idea for this subcontrol is ensuring that you whitelist all the applications, websites, etc. that are allowed to be accessed, and everything else that's not whitelisted should be decrypted and analyzed prior to getting to the end user, so you can protect your network and the users. And that's the last one there. So the sneaky peeky into next wiki. We're going to talk about data protection. We're going to talk about need to know. That's basically authorization. We're talking about wireless access and accounts. So this one was quick, but it was supposed to be quick because I want to get through these quicker. And that's it. This is my favorite movie. Bye.